I think it is, and I think that again, it's if we put these stories out there, and then other people who are both childless and LGBTQ, or a person of colour, or a person with a disability, or any other thing that makes them different and diverse, if they can see their own stories being told and people from their communities stepping up and telling their stories, that it might make them feel that, yeah, I also have a place at this table.
Welcome to the Full Stop podcast with Sarah Lawrence from After the Storm, Berenice Smith from Walking Our Shoes, and me, Michael Hughes from Married and Childless. Now, if this is your first time here, our podcast is centred around supporting the childless not by choice community, and our aim is to be a focal point for that community, and with all our special guests, show you how to manage your grief and the issues specific to us, and by example, show that a full and happy life can be had without those children we dearly wanted. Now, this episode, we're having a conversation around diversity. We were extremely fortunate to have as our guests Victoria Firth. Now, don't believe what her website says. She is way more than a performer, theatre maker and director from Yorkshire. And we have the return of the delightful Meriel Whale, counsellor, author and World Childless Week champion. Now, we hope you will understand through our chat it's important they introduce themselves. Welcome everyone to the Full Stop podcast. And this week we have Victoria Firth and Meriel Whale as our guests. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Victoria, would you like to go first?
Yes, okay then. So hello everybody, I'm Victoria and I am female. I am northern. I am in my late 40s and I probably identify as queer, although I am currently in a lesbian partnership and I don't have children. And my work is in theatre. So I write and make theatre and clown around a little bit and do a bit of cabaret. So generally trying to be a creative person.
Thank you, Victoria. Meriel.
Hi, everybody. Please. My name's Meriel, and like Victoria, I'd say that I identify as queer. I do use the pronouns she, her, and I do various different jobs. I work as a therapist, predominantly with the childless not by choice community, although I also work with people who are LGBTQ+, and people who are neurodiverse or who have friends and family who are neurodiverse or partners. But yeah, the majority of my counselling work is with the childless not by choice community, and that's something I've been doing for nearly 2 years. I am childless, and I had various different routes to that, as we all did. And it's great to be back on the Full Stop podcast after my previous appearance when I talked about mental health and wellbeing.
And Mary, I think you'd be glad to hear that is one of our biggest shows in terms of listeners too.
Oh wow, that's great.
Because I'm obsessed with the stats. Sorry.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for joining us today, both of you. It's just really lovely that you've taken the time to come and talk to us. And before we hit the record button, Mary, you said some very important words about in terms of sort of the community and both of you and how you're representing how you want to make sure it's your stories. I wonder if you could just sort of paraphrase that for everybody, because I know I'll do it really clumsily, but it's a really important point I think that you made there.
Yeah, of course. I think I just wanted to say that although I am somebody who is queer and part of the LGBTQI+ community, I can only talk about my own story, and everybody from that community is unique and has their own unique stories. So while I'm very proud to be part of that community and delighted to be asked to represent it today, I can only really represent my own individual story and my own part of it. And it's really important to know that for as many LGBTQI+ people as there are that many stories. And I can't speak for everybody, I can speak for myself. And I think that's an important thing to know, because we're all so different and unique.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That's a really important point to make. So the podcast today, we wanted really to, one of the things that we had that we'd discovered in our journey as three presenters is all the different themes that happen or that occur within our community. So we talk about involuntary childlessness as a whole, but within that are subsets of different themes and different issues and different conversations that don't always come to light. And I found, I think it's true of Michael and Sarah, that there is very little conversation and very little anything out there really that really talks about LGBTQ+ and childlessness and how that impacts upon people. And those conversations don't seem to be happening. And I wondered if you might want to sort of talk about a little, if you felt comfortable, about how you feel that impacts on you, and to share perhaps a little bit of the change you would like to see and the conversations that you would like to take place.
I don't mind starting a bit with that question, if that's okay, Victoria. I grew up in a very liberal environment, where I had friends who had two mothers and two fathers, so very, very different kind of families to the norm. And this was in the 70s and 80s. But even so, when I came out for the first time, I experienced a lot of negativity, I guess, particularly from family members. So I went back in the closet and stayed there for quite a long time. And one of the reasons I think that I stayed in the closet for such a long time was because I thought, even though I'd had this upbringing where I'd had friends who had different kinds of families, I thought that I could only have children in a straight relationship. And so I tried really hard to do that. Obviously it didn't work. And it was a real liberation to be able to come out again for the second time and embrace that side of my identity. That was kind of once my childlessness journey was over, really. So I guess it would be really great for there to be more opportunities for people to see that you can have children in lots of different kinds of families. And I think that's really beginning to happen, which is great. I do know lots of queer people who are parents, and I think there is beginning to be a lot more acceptance about that. Probably I'm a bit blasé to it where I live down on the south coast. Perhaps might not be happening in other parts of the UK, and certainly not in the world. And it's really important to remember that things in other countries in the world are very different for LGBTQ people, very, very different. We're comparatively lucky in the UK. So yeah, I'd really like there to be more acceptance and understanding of diverse kinds of families. But also, I think we need to remember that the LGBTQ people can be sometimes, and again, this is always, you're going to be dealing with generalizations, but seen as a sort of single issue. So it's like, well, if you're gay, you can't be worried as well about being childless. So again, it's about broadening that and saying, yeah, that we need to think about the needs of all childless people. And I think particularly as we get older, I think that's really important to think about. I know that's been a theme of quite a lot of podcasts and discussions recently about ageing without children. So I think there are lots of important things to think about and lots of changes that it would be good to see. And it's reassuring to think that some of that is beginning to happen, that hopefully people like me won't think, well, I better stay and pursue straight relationships because I won't be able to have children in a queer relationship.
Yeah, I realised that in sort of trying to prepare a bit for coming on the podcast, that I was thinking about my sexuality in relation to my process of trying to get pregnant, and perhaps not so much in terms of where I've ended up. But I certainly agree with what Meriel was just saying there, in terms of the importance of role models. I think when I was younger, there was absolutely no role models at all of people who were out and queer, or, you know, however they related in terms of their identity, just people who were other than a certain kind of culture that I was experiencing, and particularly and I think that that was a real problem for me in terms of giving myself permission or validation that that could be something that I wanted, or that is something that I could determining him about, because it wasn't going to come about naturally as a consequence of being in a relationship. And I do think it's starting to change quite a lot in terms of where I live, and again, appreciating that that's quite different, but I think that that was quite a big factor for me, and more visibility around that I think is super helpful. I think the other thing for me is that I sometimes feel like being in a same-sex relationship that people relate to me as if I haven't grown up. Certainly sometimes within my family, there's sort of a sense that, you know, I'm still playing at life a bit, or being a student, or I haven't quite settled down. And that's changed now that I have, you know, when I have cohabited with partners, or now we've got a dog. The dog has been a game changer in terms of that sort of recognition of being like a family unit. But I think that a lot of that is to do with sexuality, but then it's compounded by not having children, because you're sort of not hitting those recognizable life markers of sort of maturing, getting older, and so you're always the one, like in terms of family arrangements, that can easily fit in with everybody else, because your life is just very easy and social and can just go around everything. And, you know, maybe there's not the same recognition for your homemaking. So I can see Meriel nodding, so I hope I'm not going wildly off tangent, but yeah, so I think it's just that that just recognizing that diversity of lifestyle, really.
Absolutely, I think that's right. And it's really interesting what you said about feeling there's sometimes being an attitude that you haven't really grown up yet, and I've certainly felt that. I sometimes feel like I've got two quite distinct groups of friends. I've got my friends who have families, and then I've got my queer friends who mostly don't have families in the way that we would traditionally understand them, like families with children. I actually think that the word family is a really, really diverse word, and needs to be broadened massively to encompass all sorts of different families. I think two people and a dog is a family. I think one person and a cat is a family. I think we really need to go, families are broad, but in the traditional sense of the family, I've got my kind of queer friends who mostly are childless, whether that's by choice or not. Sometimes it's by choice, and I've got my kind of family friends. And I sometimes do feel with the family friends that I'm a bit like the one who will be relied upon to play with the kids and to be quite childlike in a way. And I think that's partly because I do work a lot with children, so I do have that capacity to get down and play with kids, and that's part of my work, as well as probably that I'm just quite a playful person. But yeah, there is sometimes a sense I feel that I haven't quite grown up. I haven't hit the markers that you should hit to be a fully fledged grown up, not married, and I don't have kids. And that's sad. And I do think, like I said, we need to really broaden in this society the concept of family to be a lot broader and not to be so divisive. And then the other thing that occurred to me is, and I touched on it in a bit when I was talking about my history, is that internalized homophobia, which I really had, as well as dealing with homophobia from outside me, from other people. I also had some real internalized homophobia, which I had to kind of work on, and which I'm still working on, because we forget now, because in the UK society is a lot more liberal, but it certainly wasn't like that in the 70s and 80s, because we still had clause 28 apart from anything else. It said that you couldn't promote homosexuality in schools, and I do work in schools, and I've actually experienced homophobia from other staff in some of the schools that I've worked in. So schools are, educating children is a lot better these days, but we've still got a long way to go to help other young people not to grow up with this kind of internalized and external homophobia that we might have experienced when we were growing up.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also I think it's also just sort of, for me, I think I had a very sort of heteronormative outlook in terms of what families would look like. And so when I was thinking about having a family, I was feeling like I need to sort of have those attributes of a stable relationship, excuse me, and father figures, and all those things are important, but I was only seeing a limited way. And so I had quite a lot to process and to grieve for and to give permission for about that. But the other part maybe of my sort of internalized homophobia that was that when I was coming out, I tended to compartmentalize myself. So if there was something that I wasn't confident about with regards to my identity, I tended to keep it a bit separate from my family or from my friends who I hadn't yet come out to. And it was just like a strategy, and I was lucky enough to go away to university, so I was experimenting with my new sort of coming out identity there, but then I wasn't really bringing it home with me. And I think it was probably a spillover from having that strategy that when I started to try and explore whether I could have a child, and later when I was finding out that that probably wasn't going to be possible to me, again because I was unconfident in that identity and experiencing things like shame that can be associated with it, I took that same strategy of compartmentalizing. I was like, I need to take my difference away from everybody else, and actually I'm not sure that that's always helpful, in terms of it took me longer to access support and just within my own friendship circle or my own community, let alone accessing kind of professional support, because I just had developed early on that mindset of like, if I've got something different going on for me, then I take it away from other people because it's too risky in terms of if it's not accepted.
Yeah. And I wonder, Victoria, how have you applied that splitting off of things that are different to being childless? Or is that something that you have kind of split off a bit, or does that feel a bit more integrated now?
Well, I sort of by accident made a theatre piece about being childless, which I had absolutely no intention of doing, but it kind of arrived. I made a performance piece called "How to Be Amazingly Happy" about being childless, and that for me was a process of integration. I was like, okay, I have to stand in all of my identities now. I want to go back to being a performer, and I'm making an autobiographical show, and although there's a certain amount of character in it, it's very, very clear that it is me and it is my story. And so that sort of did become a process of thinking, okay, no, these things are true, so I have to stand in my truth, and then going to a place where I was then very public about that, then enabled me to be able to do things like this. And so now it's more integrated, but I still know that I have that edge of privacy about it, so it's not something that I would disclose in situations where I didn't feel comfortable, or I'm at my sister's house at the moment, and so I've got a niece and nephew, and one of them, I don't know whether it was told or sort of found out that I tried to have a child and couldn't, and I was absolutely floored and mortified again, because I hadn't been able to sort of control that information, and all of those feelings about being sort of a failure or whatever you were triggered. And so even though I've done very public things now around childlessness and not by choice, and integrated it, it can still come up. I guess it can still come up.
There's something really important about having control over our information and sharing it in ways that feel comfortable, whether that's information about identity or about childlessness. I think it's really important not to out other people in any way, whether that's outing them as LGBTQI plus or outing them as childless, that these sensitive, tender parts of our lives and experiences, that we have control over how that's shared. And I think Sandy, often doing it in the theatre piece, is a fantastic way of controlling what other people see of you. So yeah, I'm full of respect for you for doing that, and having seen bits of it, it was fantastic as well. So you should definitely take the chance to see it, people, if you can.
Thank you.
I wonder, you sorry to chime in, I hope you don't mind, but there seems to be this sense that you kind of have to hide away a bit then, so there's a bit of you've got a double difficulty, if you like, because you've got the childlessness and then you've got your sexuality. So it sounds to me as though that there's echoes across both subjects for you when it comes to your feelings around them. That sounds, I mean, I know that I feel a lot of shame around mine, and I'm a bit like Victoria, my stuff's all over the website, but when it comes to people talking to me about it, it's like, whoa, you know, we do it on my terms. I'm not going to have this thrust at me, and so I can be very sort of like, I'm going to shut this down. So it sounds to me like Berenice and I were sort of trying to find some things, you know, to research and sort of think, well, you know, how do we get into your frame of reference? How do we talk about this? But there's so little out there. So is there a sense that you are part of this community, but you're kind of hidden away a little bit?
I do think it's a bit of a double identity, and I think there can be shame associated with both parts of my identity. And both as somebody who's from the LGBTQI plus community and somebody who's childless not by choice. I blog a lot about childlessness on my website, and I'm beginning to be more open on my website about also being LGBTQ plus. I did a seminar a year ago about diversity and childlessness, and that was the beginning of me being a bit more open about that part of my identity. And then when the new edition of Jodie Day's book, Living the Life Unexpected, came out, she really made a big effort to broaden the diversity content of that book and to speak to people of colour, to LGBTQI plus people, to people who have practiced religions. She really did broaden out, and that's great. So there is now some material out there. But yeah, I think there is a bit of a double whammy, and in a way, every time you start a new job, you have to come out in a way both as queer and childless. And also for me, I have to come out as being neurodiverse, as being dyspraxic, which is a thing that you can't even see. But actually, you can't see that I'm childless, and you can't see that I'm queer either. So I've got all these things that you can't see, and I have to talk about them. And I've had probably more negative comments about my childlessness in some of the places that I work than I have about being queer, which is quite difficult, because being queer is an identity that I can celebrate. I'm really proud of it. I really want to celebrate it. I love doing things with my queer community and really celebrating that. I don't want to celebrate being childless. I can't celebrate that. That's one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. Even just saying that now makes me feel a bit emotional, you know. And my journey ended 5 years ago, almost to this day, actually. So yeah, it's not something that I yet feel I can kind of be out and proud about. I'm proud of how I've dealt with it. I'm proud of what I've done with my life because of my childlessness, and I've really turned it, hopefully, to good use. Like, I'm turning around and supporting the childless people coming up, you know, behind me with my counselling and the things that I write. But yeah, it's very hard to celebrate the fact of it itself, whereas being queer is something that I love. So yeah, and it's a funny one, actually, that dual identity thing, something I can be really proud of and happy about, and something that I'm a bit, it's tinged with sadness.
And appreciate that we, yeah, I'm just struggling to get some words together here, because there's so much in terms of you touched there on the being neurodiverse, the dyspraxia, which I know that we're going to talk about separately, Meriel, because
yeah.
We share that in common, and that idea of sort of celebration. And I suppose maybe I'm thinking that there's so much, there is celebration in terms of LGBTQ plus and pride, and I think maybe perhaps people are understanding that a little bit more than they did before. But again, as you both rightly said, you know, it's not that long ago that this was definitely an area, again, like we found with talking to Yvonne, and this very recent history within my lifetime. And I know probably within yours as well, that illegality, inaccessibility, it's not spoken about, it's completely taboo.
Yeah.
Then you have the whole concept of the whole neurodiverse, and I don't know about you, but I find it very hard to explain what dyspraxia is, because it's such a broad church that, that frankly, there's that idea of, none of us, can dress ourselves or something like that. And that's just definitely not an issue that either of us have. I'm wearing clothes, and so is Meriel, just to be clear, everybody. We're fine, and we're here. But, again, that has its own judgment.
Yeah.
Then of course you then add on this another layer, isn't it, as well, of childlessness, and I think it's very interesting about what you've both spoken about in terms of going public about this, because again the podcast is kind of a big step, I think, in terms of, for the three of us, going public and saying, if you search my name, all of our names here on this podcast today, you will find that comes up as a theme. And it's the attitudes to that, and there must be a kind of, I mean, I can only speak from sort of the dyspraxia, and obviously for the whole thing of childlessness, and there's assumptions that people make, but there's huge assumptions made, I think, in terms of the areas that, my words are getting tangled up, this is dyspraxia as well, isn't it? But it's just these assumptions that people make about all of these different areas within this big kind of umbrella of involuntary childlessness, which in itself is a tangled phrase.
Yeah.
Because not everybody, there's another phrase I saw the other day about anotherhood, was a phrase that I saw recently as well, which I think is a very good phrase, because not everybody likes the less. It's all very complicated, all these labels,
language,
apply to each other.
I think we're all carrying a weight of expectation. What are LGBTQ people plus, like what we've already said, as diverse as there are LGBTQ plus people, but it's certainly not that long ago, for example, LGBTQ plus people couldn't adopt or foster, and again that wasn't that long ago, I don't think. So we're carrying these weight of expectations of what these labels make us like. Childless people can just swan about doing whatever they want, get up whenever they like, and I've had people say things to me like, oh, it's all right for you to do this piece of work that we've all got to do. You don't have a life outside work because you don't have kids. So suddenly it's okay for me to work harder because I don't have to go and pick my kids up, or hang on, I do have a life outside work. I really do. So we're holding these assumptions that are given to us because of our labels, where I think it's really important. And it's kind of what I was saying about not being able to represent other people, that we focus in on individual stories and individuals, and we don't use these labels to make assumptions. And I think that's the case about neurodiverse people, as you've identified, Berenice. We have these labels. It's the same about queer people, about childless people. Really investigating what someone's life and experience is like, and not going with the laziness of making an assumption because of a label. I think that's really important.
I think there's something about assumptions that I wanted to add to that, which is that I think sometimes people feel like if you're in a same-sex relationship or a non-typical relationship, in my experience, in a same-sex relationship, that you don't want to have children.
Yeah.
So there's just an assumption that that all of those things that affect a lot of childless people, childless not by choice people, where people are insensitive in those kinds of comments like, oh gosh, it must be so easy for you, or like, oh, I wish I didn't have kids, and all of that kind of stuff. There's possibly even less filtering because people don't clock perhaps as sensitively. I don't know, I'm really worried that I'm making those generalizations here, but I think the bottom line is that sometimes people think that by choosing, if there is to be gay, you are also choosing not to have children, because that is predetermined by the kind of relationship that you're having. And lots of queer people are happily childless by choice, which is fantastic, but there are also a large number who are childless not by choice and just felt like it was never an option for them, or tried and found out like it wasn't possible, as in my case. But other people don't think that. They just think it's a default position of being queer, that you wouldn't have kids, and that is starting to change. I think in terms of people are recognizing more those people who have been successful with children as families, but there's still a lot of invisibility around those people who tried and didn't get to have families.
Absolutely. I think it's why it's important to tell these stories, and I think that's why, Victoria, your theatre making is so important, because it's a way of telling the story in a really accessible and fun way, because your show was a lot of fun as well as being about, a very painful topic. There's a lot of moments that I remember, smiling and laughing at, partly kind of in recognition, but partly just because it was just, a fantastic story, fantastically told, and it was an enjoyable experience to watch it, as well as being very poignant. But yeah, I do think we need to have the guts to tell these stories without shame. But as I know, that's not easy. It's only in the last year that I've really been able to come into that part of my identity as a queer childless person, and that's yeah. And I was worried about it. I was worried that it might affect my business or my work to come into that identity. But it's an important one to come into, particularly as I think the two things are connected in my story anyway. Yeah, which is why we need to, talking about it, even if it does feel anxiety and sort of vulnerability inducing, is an important thing to do, and having the opportunity to come on podcast and to write. I blog a lot, very broadly, about childlessness, but I am, as I say, beginning to bring more of my identities into my writing. And when Jodie asked me to come on the podcast a year ago about diversity and childlessness, and she interviewed me for the new edition of the book as well. That was really good. Yeah, having the guts to kind of put myself out there.
I think you both do incredibly well with that. I think you're both examples to many people in the sense of how you've kick-started those conversations through the work that you do. It does take huge amounts of courage to do that, and again, I've watched your play as well, Victoria, and I think it's just incredibly accessible, but also just really interesting and incredibly moving as well. And yeah, it's really important. I really recommend that people go and watch that, because you recently put it online, didn't you, as well? Is that right?
Yeah, so the last part of the tour was cancelled because of COVID and theatres being shut down. So I thought for August, which is traditionally the Edinburgh Festival Fringe month, which is where I first did the show, that I'd put it online. So it's up online for all of August. But I think I'm also going to put it up at the end of World Childless Week.
Fabulous. That's really good.
If people don't catch it in time, it'll be available again then.
Lovely, that's fantastic. That's really good. We'll make sure that we get those links out as well to our audience here as well. World Childless Week is not far away, as we're all aware. We're all involved in some form.
Yeah, actually, on the one of the days on the diversity, we've got a diversity day at World Childless Week this year, which is exciting. And Yvonne and I are releasing a series of video interviews as part of World Childless Week. That's Yvonne John, who's been on this podcast before, and we're looking forward to getting those interviews out there, one of which is with Victoria, so that's quite exciting. And those interviews are going to be coming out to watch during World Childless Week.
Fantastic. World Childless Week actually falls, I'm just grabbing the website here, it falls on the 14th of September until the 20th of September, and you'll find lots of people from the podcast, our guests, involved during the week. It's very busy this year. There's a lot going on as well. So it'll be fantastic to catch up and with different people in our community about lots of different things. And the Diversity Day, I think, is going to be really, really interesting. I know that you've been working really hard on that, Meriel, with Yvonne. There's an awful lot going on that day. It's going to be quite busy.
I think it is. And I think that, again, it's if we put these stories out there, and then other people who are both childless and LGBTQ or person of colour or a person with a disability or any other thing that makes them different and diverse, if they can see their own stories being told and people from their communities stepping up and telling their stories, that it might make them feel that, yeah, I also have a place at this table.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, in fact, actually, that's an interesting phrase you've used there, because it's one that both I think Sevilla and Yvonne have also used. Is that, you know, we all have a place at the table. It's just the setting looks a little bit different. Yeah, and I think that is just such a really good analogy. Particularly, I think when you talked before about, you know, kind of dealing with family and things like that, and again, I think we've all experienced that to some degree, and I can empathise completely that now. I have a dog, I now have a responsibility, and therefore I've slightly grown up in a very, very tiny way, just because I have this thing with 4 legs. It's about, oh, you know, but, you know, actually, and when I go out with family, and I don't have, for whatever reason, my brother got married in November last year, so I didn't have the dog with me. And as I've got to feel quite naked without the dog. So I don't have my responsibility anymore with me. Therefore, I've kind of regressed back somewhere to when I was sort of 18 and a goth. And you know, it's odd how that happens and how that kind of that narrative plays into perhaps all of our stories somewhere along the line. But it's that place at the table, whether it's your family's table, whether it's an actual table or something else, you know, we all have the right to be there. It's just sometimes a little bit hard to take that seat and to sit there and be with that moment.
Yeah, I think if I'm just thinking of something Victoria said a few minutes ago about expectations, and if people can appear at that table and say, I've got a story and I'm going to tell it, then that will challenge the assumption and the expectation that LGBTQ plus people have somehow chosen not to have kids because they've chosen this lifestyle. They actually know there are queer people who wanted kids and didn't have them, and there are people from other communities who wanted them and didn't have them. And it's really so important to get these diversities of stories out there to really challenge the weight of assumptions that can be honest. You know, like all childless people are this. All LGBTQ people have chosen not to have kids, and I've got to start saying no, that there are so many different routes and so many different stories.
There's also that kind of idea, I think, is where you have that lack of education over, obviously we're talking about childlessness, but in terms of that bit before childlessness and the ways that there are to have children. You kind of going back to that, just adopt scenario, but actually there are, which is obviously not we kick back on that one big time, because it's not a case of just doing anything. Nothing's a just when it comes to trying to have children, but there is a lack of awareness and education in the part before you come to involuntary childlessness. It's about all the different ways that people can be a parent, but also how fragile that journey is as well, and how it's not as simplistic as people assume it to be. And we see it so often, don't we, in the media. I know it's something that BB Lynch has spoken about as well, and one of our past guests as well. We've all talked about it at some point, that it actually is incredibly complex, and people really do suffer a huge ignorance. I kind of want to say they suffer, because it's an ignorance that I think it perpetuates in society, and you see it so often in any article about infertility, adoption, fostering, all those different ways. That's a big conversation, I think, that needs to happen as well.
Yeah, I sort of want to shoehorn something in here. I'm trying to think if I'm shoehorning in around it being about
go
different
ahead.
identities, or whether I just want to say it and it applies to everybody to a degree. But I think you're talking about there's lots of different ways that people think about having children and awareness around that, or where there's ignorance around that. And I think in terms of a same-sex relationship and trying to have children, or as a single woman and trying to have children, and I've been both, there is a fundamental thing about how you're going to go about it. And if you choose to do it with clinical help, then you also get sort of medicalized. I'm sort of doing air quotes with that, like potentially a lot earlier on in the journey. So quite a lot of people obviously go to clinical help because they, for various reasons, and as variously successful or not, but sometimes when it doesn't come from a clinical beginning place, it just comes from an absence of what genetic material you need, trying to navigate those systems, and plus with the queer identity, quite perhaps sometimes earlier on in the process. So, like, again, there's generalizations in there, but what I wanted to get at saying, really, because it's been the thing that people have fed back to me whenever I've done speaking like this, that it's been one of the most helpful things I've said, is that for me, in terms of moving on in my childless journey, realizing that what happened to my identity as the result of being medicalized or going through a process of IVF is that it is in itself a traumatic process. It's a trauma, and it really helped me in moving forward to see it as such, because then I started to take care of myself in a different kind of way, and I'm sure that has resonance for lots of people, which is why I just wanted to make sure that I said it.
I'm glad you said that, Victoria. I think that's very true. As someone who's gone through it as well, IVF, it is a trauma. It's, yeah, I'm still coming to terms with that kind of trauma side of it, and realizing that it actually is something like that, and framing it like that, because I've kind of been a bit dismissive that it was a thing that happened, and now it's, compartmentalized it into other medical stuff, but actually it's not. It's so much more than that. It's a much bigger thing that demands its own sort of coming to terms with, and its experience as well. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
And support, so important to, as you said, Victoria, to the way you treat and support yourself after something like that has been so traumatic, particularly if you're also dealing with shame. You can feel like, well, I don't deserve to be supported, I don't deserve to be cared for, I don't deserve to care for myself, because I feel ashamed. But actually, I think we need to turn that on its head as well and say, yes, it is a traumatic experience, and that we do need to be able to care for ourselves, and to also expect that from other people, and not to think we don't deserve it.
Very well said. Yeah.
It's you're talking about. Oh, sorry, Michael, you've chimed in.
You go ahead. You go ahead, Sarah. You go ahead.
You sure?
Yep.
So you were talking about milestones earlier, which I found interesting, because I too chime with that. I think there's perceptions that I've not graduated as such because I haven't got children. So I wonder what you've got planned going forward. What milestones do you still want to achieve moving forward, Victoria, especially because obviously you've got your play, which I saw a snippet of at the fertility fair. Was it last year? Seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it, with COVID? So what else have you got planned going forward?
Well, I've written a new show, which is it's called Batty, and it doesn't exist yet, so because of the state of theatre and culture at the moment, but it's about a woman who thinks she might be turning into a witch, and it's looking at the idea of the untamed woman, or rewilding. So I guess there's some similarity in that it's looking at themes of otherness, but it's also looking about how our connection with nature and the seasons and rituals are really important for our sense of self, and also by being more connected to ourselves, we're also more connected to the environment, which is something that I realise that I'm getting increasingly interested in as a theme. So at some point, hopefully, when the world starts to move again, I'm going to be making a new show. And I'm also training to be an Alexander Technique teacher, which again, I would have qualified by now if it wasn't for COVID, but hopefully at some point I will do. So for me, one of the things that came out of being childless was that I sort of got off that track of going, oh, this is how a life rolls out, because mine clearly isn't. And I had to do a massive rethink and go, oh, actually, what what is happiness? What's that made of? Is it made of having a strong identity, or having a sense of belonging, or a sense of purpose, or being part of a community? And so I was like, okay, well, how do I make those things? And I think having that permission to do things that you want to do is really hard to give yourself, but so important. And I like doing different things, and I like trying new hobbies, and I always did want to do performing. And so that's why I was like, okay, well, it always felt really high risk before, and it still was, but there was a sort of feeling of, what else can go wrong? I may as well just go for this now, because everything else has, gone to tosh. I know I can swear, but I'll avoid it. But it was stronger language at the time. And so I'm really pleased that that's working out for me, sort of going, okay, I'm going to pursue my passions. I'm going to pursue my interests. I'm going to keep working on other relationships that I have in my life, that feels really healthy for me, and it is making me happy. So I'm going with more of that.
Fantastic. I like the sound of the new play, I have to say. That's right up my street. All the witchy, naturey stuff, that's all my sort of bag as well. That's going to be amazing. What about you, Meriel? It sounds like you've got a lot coming up as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to see your play, Victoria. I really hope you can bring it down to the South Coast. Otherwise, we'll just have to have some kind of trip up to see it wherever it's on, whether that's Edinburgh or somewhere else. But just want to say that Brighton has a very good Fringe Festival when it's allowed to be on again. So just saying. I will talk about what I've got coming up, but also just want to say that not becoming a mother changed me as much as becoming a mother would have done, I think. And actually, I do think that's been a big milestone in my life. And I think it's really important for people to know that I wrote a blog a few months ago for other therapists, particularly therapists with children, about what your childless client wants you to know. And I asked other childless people to help me with this. So again, I didn't make assumptions about all childless people have the same thoughts, feelings and journeys, because we know that's not the case. So yeah, I just want to say that actually not becoming a mother was a huge milestone, and actually did really change me. And I'm going to write another blog about how that changed me and how that changed other childless people quite soon. Because I think it does make us grow up in quite a painful way, actually, and mature in a way that can be very painful, but can also hopefully give us something, as well as taking other things away. But that's a future blog which is to come, and hopefully it'll be an interesting one. I guess for me, I just want more of the same in my life at the moment. I want to carry on working with the childless community as a therapist. I'd quite like, if I can, at some point to do couples counselling training so that I can work with childless couples, because that's something that I've been asked for and haven't been able to offer, because I haven't done the training, and I don't want to start working with couples without having had the training. I think that's really important to be properly trained. But I'm really very happy just carrying on with my work at the moment with childless people one-to-one in therapy. I want to keep blogging and getting those stories out there. And just enjoying my relationships of all kinds, especially with children. Actually it's really important for me to have positive relationships with children. I've got a nephew, I've got 2 goddaughters, one official and one unofficial, and these relationships really matter to me, and it's important for me to have positive relationships with children. I guess the most exciting new thing that's happened to me recently is becoming a novelist and finishing a first draft of my first novel, which has now got to go through second and many more drafts. But I've started, and I've started my second novel, and I've also got 2 others kicking around, and there's sort of 3 on the go and ideas for 2 more, and 2 out of the 3 are queer historical novels, which is a genre that I particularly love, and then 1 is a contemporary novel but with queer characters. So that's a big, exciting new thing in my life that I'm really enjoying.
Totally amazing.
Yeah, so I'm really enjoying that. And yeah, so watch this space. Hopefully, you know, I'm sort of calling myself the Sarah Waters of the Midlands at the moment, because although I live on the South Coast now, I did grow up in Birmingham. So yeah, Sarah Waters, and hopefully she and I will at some point be contemporaries, in the sense we're both published queer historical fiction novelists. So that's where I'm hoping to be, just carrying on with everything that I'm doing now, plus being a published novelist.
That's incredible. So you're both going to be incredibly busy then, basically.
Yeah, because people have loads of, you know, we're never busy. We can just run about and get up. And
well, this is it. Really so masses and milestones for both of you. That's incredible.
And it's nice to be able to talk about those other things, because conversation is so rich, because everybody's so interested and everybody's got so much going on. But we have a very sort of narrow bandwidth of small talk, I think. I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but for me. So, you know, you start those kind of conversations with the weather, but then you go to, oh, have you got a partner, which is assumed to be sort of generally heterosexual, and what do you do for a living, and how are your kids, and you know that we have this kind of almost like a script of how we socially engage, you know. And so being LGBTQ plus and the sort of multidimensional identities of not having children, it's like it's just good to be able to broaden out the social currency that we have in terms of getting to know each other and forming relationships, because everybody has got so much going on and there is so much to talk about and delight in.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful to hear, you know, these creative adventures that we're going on that you know have nothing to do with our childlessness. They're just these big creative adventures that are happening. So yeah, Batty sounds absolutely fantastic, and yeah, got to keep having these big lives that are much broader than our identities. This is very big, creative, juicy lives, really.
I love it. No, it's what you say, isn't it? It's that script, you know. So what's the weather like? You just think, oh goodness me, come on, you must have more in the locker than that. Really, there's got to be more. The number of times as well, you'll just have a random conversation with someone and it goes straight to, are you married? Have you got children? And you just think, oh come on, it's got to be better than that, surely. I do wonder whether texting and modern tech though has sort of diminished it still further, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the last few months have been so odd in terms of our social connectedness. When I was thinking about doing this podcast, I was thinking, gosh, it'd be really nice to do something that would have been on Zoom anyway. That, you know, this was never going to be a face-to-face meeting. With Michael in Australia, it would have been extremely difficult. Maybe, you know, you should have flown over, Michael. I really think so.
He tried. He really tried.
I was so looking forward to meeting you face to face. Anyway, yeah. So yes, I think how we talk about things, and in an age of COVID, how, you know, something to think about, because yeah, how is that changing? But yes, I do agree. Let's get off the questions about the immediate circumstances of our lives and onto the bigger picture, because we're all, you know, as Victoria says, we're all so interesting. We're all leading these very interesting lives. What is in our hearts is so interesting and so powerful.
And I think there's a thing about, you know, just it's about sort of moving away from singular labels to the fact that everybody is multidimensional, you know, because I know sometimes, you know, as a woman who's childless, not by choice, a lot of people question like whether they're like a full woman or they've realised their womanhood, you know, because they've not been a mother. You know, so this is kind of, I don't know if it's a kind of imposter syndrome or what have you, but like I have imposter syndrome as an artist, like that. I'm probably, you know, am I a real artist? No, everything's probably rubbish, you know. But I also have imposter syndrome, like as a gay woman or what have you, and that's partly why I probably prefer the term queer, as well as the fact that I think, you know, my identity's broad, in that I guess I think we earlier were talking about resources and where you find a community, and sometimes what the social offer has been for a gay community or a scene, you know, it's quite a narrow aesthetic, you know, it's not everybody's taste. And maybe an upside of the fact of the proliferation of things going online is that there's more opportunities for people to explore their own interests and the diverse range of that, because, you know, one of the reasons I feel slightly uncomfortable, like going back to where Meriel started at the beginning, representing kind of a community, is I'm like, I'm not even sure if I'm a proper one of them, you know, and and it's just hard. We're so self-judging ourselves all the time in so many layers, and we sort of need to start embracing ourselves with all of our so many layers. Did that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely, it made a lot of sense, Victoria. We do need to take accountable our many layers, and also the fact that we're bigger than all of them. You know, as we are bigger than just our labels, bigger and more complex. And and I say queer is a really useful term in that sense, because it means you don't have to say which letter on the alphabet, the LGBTQI plus alphabet you are. It allows us to have a broader identity, which I think is really, really supportive and really brilliant. So yeah, I totally what you said was great.
Fabulous. Thank you both so much.
That was fantastic.
Come to a brilliant conclusion.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Because I haven't been able to get a word in edgeways.
I did want to say at some point, I think Michael wants to say something, and then I was like, actually no, I'm a guest on this podcast. I don't need to do that.
Only because when Vicky listens to this, she's going to go, Michael, I didn't hear you. No, really, what I really wanted to say was that I was actually quite anxious about this episode, because I like to talk about things I know about. And of course, I have absolutely no idea about the lives that you two lovely ladies live. So I want to say how privileged I feel to be part of this. And I wish I could have come over, and I wish I could have been here, because I hope this comes out right, but I'd like to sit at your table and listen to you.
Thank you.
So I wish I could give you both a big hug.
Thank you. Well, we're here at the virtual table all together.
We are, yeah. Yeah, we are. And I felt a bit self-conscious in that I didn't know how to bring in, I sort of wanted to try and bring into the room people who identify as trans or people who identify as gay male. And I didn't know to, how to bridge that, because I can't speak to it. But I'm mindful that even though we sort of made that disclaimer that we're only sharing our own stories, that we still do tend to sit towards a certain part of the acronym. So I don't know. I guess I just raised that. I'm raising it now because I didn't raise it then, and maybe it's still part of the conversation.
I tried really hard to find a trans or non-binary person, to interview a trans or non-binary childless person to interview for the Childless Circle videos that Yvonne and I have done, and I'm still trying, and they're being edited now. It's been really difficult, and I really wanted to include that part of the community, because I think it's really important. I think trans and non-binary people really do need to come up to the table and be invited to be part of the table, because it's a lot of challenges to them at the moment, particularly. Yes, if you need to keep trying with that.
We had Andy Harrod and I started the Clan of Brothers, which is a safe space just for guys and who are childless, not by choice. And we actually had someone approach us who was acting on the behalf of someone who was trans to join the group. And look, I think it must be so tough for them, because I've of course sent back and said, hey, everyone's welcome. If you identify as a trans man and want to be part of this, please come in. But we've yet to see them ask for approval. So it must be really, really tough for people like that. So tough.
Yeah, I think we need to, it's important for me anyway to step up and be an ally to the trans and non-binary community. So yeah, it's absolutely important. So thank you for bringing that up, Victoria. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I was just in the same way, I guess, talking about sort of identities overlapping in terms of being childless and being a queer woman. They will be different, but there will be the same thing of overlapping identities for people who are, childless not by choice and male and identify as a gay man or a queer male. And so I don't know whether just by saying something like that, it helps to bring them into the room, or, so that, there's an acknowledgement, even though we can't speak to it. I don't know. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, just thought it was worth throwing around in case there's any bits of conversation that become usable to help do that, or if not, at least we've sort of acknowledged it. If there's a way how the notes of the episode are framed or something.
I think the other thing that's really important to mention is that we're talking from a UK perspective, and I know I touched on this earlier, but there are so many countries in the world where people, LGBTQI plus people, are still persecuted, both by the law and by society, most horrendously. And I think that's something that troubles me a lot. How in the UK things are a lot better. Civil partnerships, marriage, LGBTQI people plus able to adopt, able to access fertility treatment. Just there's so much things are so much better. I'm not saying there isn't still homophobia and prejudice, because there is in the UK, but yeah, I think thinking of our global LGBTQI plus community is really important as well, where it's by no means is it like this everywhere in the world, which something that troubles me.
Definitely.
Hopefully this podcast starts a conversation,
yeah,
brings that about, and we just want to, I think, probably say that, invite anybody who feels that they would like to carry this conversation forward via the podcast, or in fact in any other platform, then please do get in touch with us in confidence. The emails only come to us, don't go anywhere else, and more than happy to pass those on and to carry this conversation on in the form of other episodes. I think that's really important, that we act as a vocal point for that, and that's what we're finding, I think, in doing the podcast. We just thought we could sit for, I don't know, however long we wanted the podcast to go on for indeterminately and talk about the themes that we knew about, but we realised very quickly in the people that we were meeting through Fertility First and through other events and online as well, that there are so many other aspects of our community that need or deserve that voice. So absolutely, if anybody feels that they want to carry that conversation forward and to come along and to have to do an episode with us, then we welcome you, absolutely welcome you in this safe space.
Thanks for staying a distance. Now please don't forget, we are also on the Trinity of Facebook, Insta and Twitter, and all those links can be found on our website www.thefullstoppod.com, where you can also register for our newsletter so you can keep up to date with everything we are up to. We would also appreciate it if you could rate us on the platform you're using to listen to the podcast. The more ratings we get, the wider our spread and the more our community can be reached. Now we'll put Victoria and Meriel's details in the show notes. And if you'd like to be a guest or have a burning issue you think our community should be aware of, we've got all official and have a form on our website that you can fill in to give us some details. Don't forget, we love hearing from our audience, so please drop us a line anytime. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.
Yeah.
You betcha.
Great.
Thank you. I really
Thank you
enjoyed
so
that.
much.
Actually, it was so
Did
lovely
you?
to talk
Oh, I'm
to
so
you.
pleased.
I
Thank you.
did.
Really,
I did.
I was really nervous, but I was just really nervous. I wouldn't have anything to say, but I should realise now that that's never really an issue for me. So I just